Here's something that really gets said in leadership conversations: the way that you start your day, the things that you do before anyone is watching, and the small choices that you make when no one is keeping the score. These are not separate from your leadership, they are leadership. Welcome back to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I'm your host, Sayan, and I'm genuinely glad that you have chosen to spend this time with us today. My guest is Matthew Jacques, CEO of Neptune NT, a veteran-owned and operated security company and a former Royal Australian Navy officer with over 15 years of military experience. He brings a people-first leadership philosophy that's forged in some of the most demanding environments that's imaginable. And today he's here to talk about that direct link between daily habits and the quality of leadership that we are able to offer. So this is a conversation for anyone who is in a leadership role, formal or informal, or wants to show up better and not just work harder. So Matt, it's an honor to have you here with me today and excited to have this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm super keen to get into it.
Likewise, and just a little disclaimer for all the folks listening to this today.
Hey, dear listeners, before we begin, a quick note from Healthy Man Payavik. This episode is created for educational and informational purposes only. The views shared by our guests are their own and may not reflect those of the host or network. Nothing in this conversation should be taken as medical, legal, financial, or professional advice. Please consult a qualified professional before making important decisions. We encourage you to listen with curiosity, think independently, and use this content as a starting point for reflection, not a substitute for professional guidance. Now, settle in and enjoy the conversation.
So, Mary, I want to start with a very interesting question. How frequently, when you do something, becomes a habit? And I think we have all heard about this 21-day rule, which says that, if you keep doing something for 21 days, it becomes a habit. So how true of a thing you think it is? And if you have any other views that you would like to put forth or a misconception that people usually carry around it.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I think one of the greatest books ever written was Atomic Habits. I've read that a couple of times, or, I'm not much of a reader, I'm more of a listener, so I definitely listened to it a few times. I would say the 21-day rule is pretty accurate. However, I think it's just once you set your mind to that task and you want to create that habit, you've just got to follow through. That, it's having that mindset that when you get into it and if you're saying, right, I want to go to the gym tomorrow, right? It's laying your gym gear out the night before. It's doing all the little micro habits that'll ultimately lead to the outcome that you're trying to get to. Even if the next morning you don't get up and go to the gym, but your intent was still there, and you set your alarm, and then you put your shoes on and you get to the kitchen sink and you have a coffee. At least you're up at the time that you're intended to go to the gym. The next day you might do the same exact habits, but this time you get into your car and you drive to the gym. You might not go inside. Day 3, you might actually get to a point where you're actually inside the gym, have absolutely no idea what you're lifting or no idea if what sort of program you're going to do, but at least you made it. So it's the little micro habits that ultimately lead to the outcome.
Yeah, I think that's very well framed. So, Mary, I also, curious to ask you this because I read about it somewhere, not that I remember exactly where. I think it was also not a book. I think it was written in some published article, but not that I remember. But I'll paraphrase that a little bit. It said that, doing. Okay, so let me ask you, Mary, what is the first thing that you do every day in the morning that sets you up for the second task? What would you like to say?
But I guess my alarm goes off. The very first thing I do is I hit that end because it's the most annoying sound in the world. I then proceed to the shower, man. I have a quick 5-10 minute shower, get in my gym gear. This morning was different. So it's 0500 here in Darwin, which is more normally the time that I'm going to the gym. So I would walk out of the kitchen, make my shaker, put all my supplements in, get in the car, drive to the gym. I'd do an hour on the treadmill, which is just walking, get my steps in. And then I've got a coach. I'm a big believer that you should have a coach in every aspect of your life, whether you're in business, whether you're in leadership, whether you're trying to get fit. Like, go and get somebody that is an expert in their field, in that specific thing that you're trying to get better at. So yeah, so that's sort of my routine. I'll then lift weights for an hour, and then so that takes me through about 7:30. I'm back home, shower, coffee, and then I'm going to work. I have 15-minute window where I set myself up for success for the day. I write down the things that I need to do, and then we roll into an 8:05 meeting at Neptune where we have a little team huddle. We talk about our values, we talk about our mindsets, and then we crack on for the day.
Lovely. That's perfect. It sounds like productivity boosted routine. I mean, a lot of it based on having that perfect start as well. And so what I really read, Maddie, and I want to share it with everyone who's listening to this as well. The first thing that the author wrote was, he said that making your bed every day when you wake up, that is something that, and it's easy, right? I mean, you could do it. And that is what that sets you up for the next task. And so, Maddie, I do want to ask you this. People who maybe start with something in hope that it would become a habit, but it's out of motivation, right? But somewhere that lacks. So I want to ask you this, what is the difference between something starting off from motivation versus, something that eventually builds up to become a habit, and since we're talking about, atomic habits, what would you really like to share and put forth?
I think for it to become a habit, you need a lot of discipline as well, right? So motivation is something that we feel in the moment. Discipline is obviously something that is repetitive. It's something that you can create. And, the thing with discipline is you've got to be able to do it even when you're not feeling motivated. So that speech that you were hearing about making your bed every single day was by a US Marine, one of the greatest speeches of all time. I can't think of his name off the top of my head right now, but essentially he talks about, making your bed is the first win of the day, which is, it's the same in the military. Obviously I did 20 years in the military. And it's the same thing there when you go through recruit school. It's the very first thing that you do is you make your bed for the day. There's a certain standard you got to make it to. It can actually take sort of 15 to 20 minutes to make your bed in the military, which is pretty crazy when, they get you with the way they want you to do it. But in order for me, for a habit to become, ritual, it comes down to discipline. And you've got to have that ability to just do something when you ultimately don't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I could only imagine, Maddie, because you come from a military environment, and that naturally, I mean, something like that demands a high level of discipline and routine that most civilian workplaces don't, right? So I must put that forth. And I imagine that transition from a world with that kind of structure that's built to building your own structure from scratch did teach you something important about why habits work and what happens when the scaffolding disappears. So curious to ask you, what did that shift really teach you about how humans actually need routine and what falls apart when the routine goes?
Look, I can sort of talk about this from a personal standpoint. So,
Yeah.
So from 21 to 23, I was in a workplace in the military that was functioning really well. It was a great vibe. The culture was phenomenal. That was led by a really good leader. 24, we had a change out of leadership and the workplace sort of shifted and it became really toxic for a lack of a better word. And that affected a lot of people in that workplace, but it also affected myself massively. I put on nearly 40 kilos. I stopped training. I stopped, having a healthy mind. I sort of I went sideways really badly to the point where in mid 24, I broke down. I was burnt out. I, mentally collapsed. In March of 24, I'd lost my gallbladder from stress. And then later in 24, I had pancreatitis, and then I had my appendix burst also. So this was all just from unhealthy thoughts, unhealthy habits, and without a really good structure in place to tie it back to that, these things can sort of creep up on you. And, the culture, I think if you've got a leader that doesn't have structure and it is chaos, that's the sort of shift that can put towards your team and your people. If you're, coming in one day, it's rainbows and unicorns, and you come in the next day and it's, Voldemort's turned up and, is waving the magic wand around and destroying the workplace, and you're doing that, within the confines of a week, that can have a massive effect on your people. So when you put a structure in place and you've got, the processes and the procedures and the habits all in that, all singing on the same song sheet, your people are going to know exactly what they're doing, how you are, how your mood is, and they're going to be able to function in a really safe environment, which is, again, coming back to the full story with me putting on weight and all that sort of stuff. So the full mindset shift for me was that what I realized was that when you link it back, if you're not taking care of yourself, you cannot take care of somebody else. That was the fundamental mind shift for me, right? So in 25, I started to put myself first. I used to be a massive people pleaser. I used to put everyone else first. And then what would end up happening is by the end of the day of putting everyone else first, I had nothing left to give to me. And then that process kept spiraling in 24, and it got to the point where I was burnt out. I was done. So once I got to 25 and decided to reclaim my life, it was February of 25. I went for my first run, in nearly 2 years after a whole bunch of injuries. My first K was at like 9.5 minutes. It was slow. I'm about to take on my first half marathon in May this year. So, that's sort of the journey I've been on. I've lost 40 kilos, and I feel better than I ever have. I turn up for my people better than I ever have. And being able to have the mindset now that, and people will say that it might be selfish that you put yourself first, but honestly, I think if you don't put yourself first and you keep putting everyone else first, you'll end up killing yourself. And that's the truth.
Yeah, I think that is something that unfortunately all of us do come to realize, but most of us maybe never early, and that has already costed us some of our lives, I would say. So for the listeners who are listening to this right now, regardless of what phase or stage of their life that they're in, and maybe we'll get to talk more about, this act of putting yourself first. And, one analogy that really comes to mind is the same as, I mean, and this is a quite common one. When you board a plane, you see, the air hostess instructing you to put on your mask first, right, before helping others. So that's something that came up to my mind, and I thought that is relevant for this discussion. But I think it's the same game for anything that you do in life as well, Maddie. And I'm so glad that you brought this part of the conversation up. So a little bit towards what you have built, which is Neptune NT, around a people first approach. I think that philosophy has to start somewhere before it really becomes an organizational wide value. So I only imagine, what was it? I mean, I think it really began in how the leader, like you I mean, saw yourself treat their own well-being, which I think makes a lot more sense right now. So may I ask, what are the daily habits that you believe every leader, regardless of their industry or their scale, needs to protect if they want to genuinely lead people rather than just manage them?
Again, I think for me, starting the day off correctly, and it's got to be moving your body. Now, you don't have to be a gym junkie like, say a Dan Martell or, even myself or a Hermosi, but you've got to be able to move your body, get out, do some steps, go for a walk, whatever it is. Just have 30 minutes to you. If that's all you can do, just get 30 minutes to you where you can, even if you walk to your local coffee shop, like just start with that. So you've got to be able to do something physical first for you. Then the next biggest thing I can say, and it was a shift that, after reading Dan's book, Buy Back Your Time, which, if any of your listeners haven't read it, I'd highly recommend it, is where, you write down the things that you need to do for you for that day, right? He talks about emails being, other people's to-do list for you. I actually fundamentally believe that. And it was one of the biggest shifts I had with, even towards the back end of my military career, was I stopped responding to emails and started focusing on my team and my people. Because at the end of the day, that's what's important, not somebody else's email to me asking me for a report. Like, at the end of the day, my people are the most important thing. Then from there, throughout the day, figure out your energy state. So one of the biggest things I do is Mondays for us at Neptune is just our meeting day. That's all we do. That's all we have on that day, which then gives me Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to get in and do actual deep work blocks, so I can realistically work on the business. And then I've got Friday, which is essentially a spare day where I either can get out and see the teams on sites, or I can get out and spend some time with my, field managers or anything like that, and help people out and get around the people. So, we sort of set the week up on Monday with all our meetings, and then we, flow into work state for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then we're off to the races on Friday. And I guess the other big thing is that throughout the year, I like to schedule four or five holidays, like genuine specific holidays, to get away, reset. If you're a business owner listening to this, or you're in a higher leadership role, if you just continuously go 350 days a year without resetting, you're going to get to a point where you're so deep in it that you can't think through solutions or through problems, that when you are refreshed and away from the company, that you can normally solve those problems. So schedule 4 to 5 holidays a year and get away from the business or get away from your workplace. So
Very valuable indeed. And I think you could scale up that advice like you did, and you could also zoom in that advice and look at the micro habits, which maybe I could say, take out some minutes out. And like you said earlier, right, 30 minutes a day when you go physical. And I think those are the moments when you could have these micro moments really with your own self, and you think about the most random thing. I mean, just make your mind work, just change the narrative. You're going out, you're going on walk on a rainy day, and ask something silly, maybe like, why does, I mean, though there's a scientific reason, I was going to say, why does petrichor smell the way it does? I mean, just try to distract your mind, anything perhaps where you could have maybe introspective conversation with your own self. I think those are the moments really when, your mind is really active and at its peak, and the moments that I personally call the micro moments, wherein you literally have the ability to reset your mind within those 2-3 minutes, maybe between two meetings back to back, or you're just in the pantry, maybe, in the cafe, wherever that is, right? So I think, and again, if you scale that idea up to an year long, I think again that very idea of taking 4-5 holidays, I think more than that should be the case, does make a very important point in how habits form up, and how we operate, right, from a person and individual standpoint. So I think, Maddie, those were really some practical tips and advices from someone from the military background, and I think those are the ones that also resonated with me. So I want to thank you for sharing this part of the grounded conversation. So one last thing, Maddie, that I would like to ask you is, so this is for the listeners who are listening to this right now and are in a leadership role, and has been quietly running on fumes. Who knows that something needs to change maybe, but outside of what you shared, building those micro habits, maybe starting in the day, wherein you start off with a physical activity, or, these kind of advices wherein that is shared towards the end, wherein you need to take some time out from your work to reset, right? So what would you like to say maybe in a sentence to the listeners, specifically the leaders, people in the leadership role right now listening to this right now who maybe feel a little guilty even taking that time to think about their own well-being because there are people depending on them. And so what would you want them to hear from you today?
As I sort of said, people sort of see my approach as a little bit selfish. However, it's a mindset reshift. Now, the way I look at it, and since I've sort of started looking at this way, is that if you're not in the perfect mindset for you, or you're not in the right place for yourself, you can't then go and lead your team. They can't rely on you because you might be turning up one day, again, rainbows and unicorns, and then, the next day it might be doom and gloom. So if you're up and down like a roller coaster, your team's up and down like a roller coaster also, right? And then it gets to a point where they're walking on eggshells because they don't know what sort of day that you're having. And, if it is just a 30-minute walk, or, you need to go and get it away, you've got to take that opportunity to go and reset and, focus on you for that small period of time. And again, 30 minutes out of an entire day isn't that much. If that's just all you can do, take that opportunity to look after yourself. Because at the end of the day, you will turn up and you will be better for your people if you can do that. If you keep grinding through, I can guarantee you'll end up just breaking and snapping, and you'll end up, you can probably tell right now, if you've got people leaving your organization every, couple of months, it's a reflection on you. So you've got to figure out that and why they are currently leaving your organization.
Yeah, another piece of, a reality check, I should say, Maddie. So thank you so much for sharing that as well. And folks, what Maddie really reminds us today is that your daily habits are, those atomic entities that shape your leadership. It's the foundation that it stands on, because these are the habits that ultimately, feeds to that leadership mindset. Ultimately, and taking care of yourself, when you think about it like that, it's not really a luxury that leadership requires you to postpone. I think it is the work that makes all of the work possible, even possible. So that is what I would like you to actually sit with today, and wherever you are listening to this right now. So before we wrap this off, Maddie, would quickly love to ask you, for people who are listening to this right now, and if they resonated with this part of the conversation or the whole of it, where can they find you and connect with your work at Neptune NT?
Look, obviously we've got our website, neptunent.com. The other place that you can get me is on Instagram. I'm sort of massive on there, so it's just Jakesy88 Instagram. So is my handle. That's probably where I'll be able to get back to you most of the time. So, and I post, daily leadership lessons on there. So that's pretty much what my page is all about. And one of my other businesses is called Frontline Horizon. So that's www.frontlinehorizon.com. And that's sort of where you'll be able to buy my upcoming book, Dictator. So.
Perfect. I'll include the details in the show notes, folks, so that you could easily reach out to Matty. And with that, folks, we hit today's minute mark on this episode. So, Matt, thank you so much. I think I really appreciate, your views coming from a very practical background. And I think, these are the kind of advices that no matter which field you go, they really go a long way along and help shape you and, your core identities as well, eventually with time. So, folks, to everyone who's listening to this right now, thanks for being here. I think if you are in a leadership role of any kind, I hope that this conversation did give you that permission to maybe rethink or reapproach your own well-being that you might have been neglecting for a while. But I think it is something that belongs on your priority list and should, after listening to this conversation. So this has been Sayan on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, and we'll see you in the next one.